Hello! I am taking advantage of this glorious snow day to make my screencast for my final project. So everything is listed out here, all of the pieces that I have except for screencast. Um, First up is the final project reflection, which is just my discussion of what the actual um, project was. Here's the lesson plan. I worked with an 11th grade English teacher. We looked at the progressive era, and so we were doing a short research project about the progressive era. On the one hand, that was the content that we were getting to the kids, but then the other part was to take a look at their individual search process and sort of get a baseline for how they would be researching when they do their own individual research later. So we targeted these standards and also the digital literacy and computer science standards. They chose, what we did was we gave a brief overview, which I will show you in a second, and the students would choose a movement from the progressive era. Then we showed them how to make a screencast and then had a flip grid at the end for their reflection. So what is this? Oh, so this originally grew out of one of the assignments that we did, and setting up a initial jumping off point for their search. So this was the one for the students. I also had one for me that had initial texts, but this was the one for the students. We wanted to just have a basic, the kids start at Wikipedia a lot of the time, and we were talking about you can start there, or you can start with a search. It showed them the database. They know the databases, but we showed them those briefly to see what their initial, sort of what they would do on their own. So here is I'll just put it in presentation mode. This is the PowerPoint that I used for the kids. There was a Gilder Lehman had a really nice infographic that showed 10 different movements of the progressive era. So we showed them these movements, did a little back and forth, Mr. Lunn and I did, about, what they were about, and then the kids could choose one of these and do an individual search. We did talk about the terms for the skills, but very briefly, and I wish that I'd gone into this in more depth, but I didn't want it to influence the way that the students would be handling their search. Then we gave them a quick tutorial on how to use QuickTime and save it. And then they had flip grids. There's the example of the screencast that I did last time. So that was what we ran through. And then, so they did some screencasts. This is one, this is Bader's. And the kids seemed very resistant to doing the thing where you talk through the screencast. But Bader, who's an EL student, took to it. So I'm just going to show you a minute of his.
I'm gonna go and look it up.
Right to Wikipedia.
Wikipedia looks good. Wikipedia, the free encyclopedia.
So we have these videos that the students had, and then at the end, let's see if Bader's is in here. Yeah. So he's not actually in this picture, but that's okay. Are you going to play for me?
Alright, so my video was about the child labor, the labor reform.
Wait, everyone get in for this.
And
there's Mr. Lunn in the background.
I feel like it looked effective because everything just went great. The child labor ended. Everyone went on strike and everything.
Okay.
Took me 2 minutes to find it.
Okay, took him 2 minutes to find it, but then if we look at his actual, the length of time that he worked, I think it was, oh, well, 2 minutes. I guess that was pretty accurate. A lot of times the kids would say, it took me 10 minutes, it took me, and they would be completely, off the charts, which was kind of interesting. So I put the student data, I don't have all of it in yet, but for the A block class, this is a CP class, kids who are not necessarily, academically challenging themselves, kids who are need a little bit of extra help in the class. And some of them, Sophia was at it for 23 minutes. Adolfo was 20 minutes. A lot of these kids, I would say probably a quarter of these kids are EL students, which was really interesting. And I found, you know, that there was no rhyme or reason really to which length kids do it. This class was, there were how many that didn't do it in this class? So it looks like 19, 20, about 10 kids were there, but just didn't do the assignment at all. They didn't have a video and they didn't have a flip grid. Now, all of these kids did do the flip grid. This is the flip grid information, but some of them did the video. Dara spent almost 10 minutes on the video, Sophia 23, but didn't do the flip grid response. So I thought that was interesting, unless more came in, but it doesn't look like it. So anyway, at some point, Len and I are going to sit down and look at this data and see what inferences we can make. And we might have to bring in someone who knows a little bit more about data. I guess what it comes down to, it was really interesting to see how different kids behave differently. And one of the things that I put in here was that the idea about student apathy, kids who just, we were in the library, and so they were very independent. They were spread out all over the place. And Len and I were both working with kids throughout the whole thing, or in Len's case, lurking behind them as they did their flip grid. But there were some kids who just, went off to the far reaches and just didn't participate. And so I am going to, not for this class, but just for my own edification at some point, find those kids within the next couple weeks, before they forget, but ask them, like, why didn't you? Is it, sort of just general apathy? Because some of the kids who didn't do it still have, well, Robert's brand new, that's why he's got 100, but Aliana didn't do it. She's got a 96 in the course. Some of the kids have lower grades, so that, it might just be that they're sort of apathetic in general. But I'm curious, I definitely want to talk to Aliana and find out what her deal is, because somebody who's going in with an A and then deciding not to do it. Anyway, so what have I learned from this? I've learned that kids are really interesting and they will search in, very different ways. I've learned that we really, really need to start this earlier. We need to start in elementary school. We need to look at, and I mentioned that in my response, we don't have elementary librarians in my school, and it shows, because the kids are all over the place with their research skills and abilities, and we need to start with digital literacy when we start with regular literacy or traditional literacy, because it's so much of their life is online, and they don't have the skill set to navigate it the way that we are trying to train them to navigate the printed word.